The story took place in a remote national forest, a place where the trees were so tall they devoured the daylight, even at noon. It was known for its unsettling quiet, a silence so complete it felt as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Three campers arrived there on a warm summer afternoon, hoping to escape the noise of the city and enjoy a night under the stars. The plan was simple: light a campfire, share food, sleep without worries, and return with the sunrise. But the forest had a different story written for them, one that no one ever comes back to tell. When night fell, everything changed. The air grew heavy, as if something unseen had descended between the trees. The temperature was mild, yet the campers began to feel cold for no reason. The treetops swayed without wind, as though responding to something hidden deep within the woods. While the fire crackled, the first signs appeared that they weren't alone. Branches breaking several meters away, leaves rustling without logic, slow steps pressing down on the undergrowth. They didn't sound like animals. They were too heavy, too deliberate, as if something large was walking toward them without fear. The campers tried to ignore the growing dread, but the forest refused to remain silent. The sounds grew louder as the night advanced. Deep breathing that nobody could locate, muffled echoes rising as if from beneath the ground, and a distant whisper, human, but with no identifiable words. Only then did the campers remember the reputation the place had among locals. A forest that never slept, a land where lone travelers claimed to hear voices calling from the dense thickets. Some returned shaken, others never returned at all. The fire, instead of being a refuge, seemed to attract whatever was moving out there. Shadows around the campsite began to stretch and move with more intent. The flames sputtered as if reacting to the atmosphere, dimming at moments without any physical reason. The trees emitted dry, cracking sounds, as though they were splitting open from the inside, a noise disturbingly similar to human bones snapping. Everything reinforced the sense that the forest was alive, breathing, and watching. The first undeniable sign that something unnatural was happening came near midnight. Between the trees, a figure appeared, silhouetted in the darkness. It was too far to see clearly, but its shape was human. It didn't walk, it floated, drifting like a curtain in a slow breeze. The campers felt that something ancient was looking at them through that figure, something that did not belong to the world of the living. It could have been exhaustion playing tricks on their minds, but the crushing chill in their chests, heavy, deep, nearly paralyzing, told them the threat was real. Then the footsteps returned, this time circling the campsite, moving closer with each pass. Soon it wasn't a single presence. There were many, like a crowd of unseen entities marching through the trees, getting steadily nearer. The campers breathed faster, and the silence between steps was worse than the sound itself, because it meant whatever stalked them knew exactly what it was doing. Campfires are supposed to scare animals away, but that night it failed. The flames weakened, fading more with each flicker, as if something was extinguishing them from within. As the light dimmed, the forest released a penetrating smell. Damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, a metallic, chemical scent, like dried blood on unseen bark. The atmosphere crushed their nerves, forcing the realization that they were inside an ancient trap. One of the nearest trees began to split, forming a deep vertical crack that resembled a mouth. The wood split open with a harsh tearing sound, and for a moment, the campers saw something inside that none of them would ever describe. It wasn't sap, it wasn't bark. It was dark, organic, as if the trees fed on something other than sunlight. The thought that the forest was a living organism feeding on whoever wandered too close began to settle in their minds, freezing them in place with terror. The footsteps stopped. Silence returned, total, suffocating, as if the world had been switched off. The campers felt a vibration in the ground beneath them, as though something was crawling under the soil. The earth trembled, and voices began to whisper from behind the trees. They weren't human nor animal. They were hollow sounds made of air and void, as if nature itself was calling them by name from somewhere beyond existence. The figure appeared again. This time it was closer, much closer, close enough to see its details. It had no face, only a smooth, ash-colored surface, as though someone had erased the expression of a human being. Its body was long, too long, as if its bones had been violently stretched. Smaller shadows moved around it, quick and with misshapen limbs. There was no doubt now, this was not human, and the forest was not merely a backdrop. It was part of them. The campfire died. The final flash of light illuminated the figures for a single second before leaving the campers in complete darkness. From the blackness, the forest moved toward them, not quickly, but with intention, as though reclaiming something that belonged to it. The sounds merged: footsteps, breaths, cracks, whispers, racing heartbeats. No one screamed. No one ran. They were swallowed by the night, by that sleepless forest that waited for its next visitors to camp beneath its hungry trees. When forest rangers arrived at sunrise, they found only the remains of a dead campfire, a torn backpack, and deep marks in the soil, as if someone had been dragged into the woods. The forest returned to silence, pretending innocence, because it knew someone else would eventually sleep under its branches, unaware that the night is always awake and always wants more. It happened at a little-used campsite deep in the southern mountains, a place surrounded by steep ravines, towering pines, and sandy ground where no signs of human presence existed except those left by the few who dared spend the night there. The site had a reputation among experienced hikers, not for its beauty, but for the unexplained stories passed down for generations. People hearing footsteps outside their tents all night, campers claiming to see lights moving between the trees, and the most disturbing of all, hikers marking the ground before sleeping only to find at dawn that something had walked in circles around their tents while they slept out on the eve of summer. 3 young people decided to ignore those warnings. They wanted excitement, isolation, and the real experience of sleeping in a place where no one else dared pitch a tent. They arrived with the last light of day and set up camp near the densest part of the forest. They had enough food, fresh water from a nearby stream, and perfect weather for a night under a spotless sky. But the darker it became, the more the place seemed to change its personality. The first sign was the silence, a silence that wasn't normal. In forests, there are always sounds: insects, branches swaying in the wind, the crack of nocturnal animals. They are nothing, not even air moving through the pine needles. The group laughed at first, thinking the area was simply quieter than usual. But that quietness felt alive, as though the forest was watching each of their movements while holding its breath. They lit a fire and ate calmly. The embers illuminated the small clearing where their tents were set up. One of them noticed something strange. The nearby tree trunks were not casting normal shadows. Where the light should have drawn clear shapes, the shadows stretched unnaturally, reaching toward places where the firelight didn't reach. It was as if the shadows themselves were searching for something, as if they wanted to touch the main tent they had set up first. They shook off the feeling and tried to rest. Not long after, a fog began to rise between the trees. It didn't come from humidity or weather. It appeared too quickly, moving like a living organism that knew exactly where it wanted to go. The fog surrounded the campsite without dispersing, forming a perfect circle around the tents. The young campers began to feel cold, a cold that didn't belong to the season. As they got into their sleeping bags, they realized the temperature was dropping every minute, as if the night wanted to drive them away. Midnight. The sound began to first faint, like footsteps someone was trying to soften while walking on loose earth. Then firmer, as if the steps were becoming more confident now that the campers weren't leaving their tents. They initially assumed it was a large animal, maybe a deer or a curious bear, but it didn't fit. The steps didn't wander or shift like an animal's movement. They moved in a perfect circle around the main tent, always with the same rhythm and the same distance between each sound. It was as if someone was walking laps, studying every angle of the camp, and no one wanted to look. The fear of unzipping the tent and confronting the unknown was stronger than curiosity. Minutes passed, and the sounds multiplied. Now it wasn't one set of footsteps, but 2, then 3. like three unseen presences pacing around the tent, repeating the same ritual walk, always at the same speed, never slowing, never stopping. That was the most disturbing part. They didn't move like living creatures, but like clocks marking an eternal rhythm. Then, suddenly, the footsteps stopped. The silence hit harder than the sound. The campers held their breath. The next noise didn't come from the ground. It came from the tent fabric. Something touched it from the outside. First a slow, damp brushing, as if a wet hand slid along the surface. Then a small tap, soft but distinct, right near the head of the person lying closest to the wall. The young man held his breath, listening as the pressure increased. It didn't feel like an animal. It felt like human fingers trying to identify what was inside. Minutes later, the fog started entering through the ground. Impossible, but it happened. It seeped in as though the tent fabric didn't exist, rising slowly from the floor up toward the ceiling. The air inside became thick and cold. The campers could no longer think clearly. Fear flooded every thought, paralyzing their muscles. They knew something was inside with them, even if they couldn't see it. Then came the worst sound, breathing. Not their breathing, another, deep, rough, uneven, as if a massive chest was struggling to inhale and exhale from a corner of the tent. There was no space for anyone else to be there, yet the breathing continued, slow, heavy, accompanied by a wet sound, as though each inhale dragged something viscous from the throat of whatever shared that space with them. Suddenly, the ground trembled. Not like a natural quake, but as if something heavy had slammed into the earth nearby. Then another impact, and another, like massive footsteps moving outside, footsteps beyond any human shape. The breathing vanished as suddenly as it had begun. Total silence returned, broken only by the pounding hearts of the young campers. When dawn finally came, none of them had slept. They exited the tent shaking, and what they found outside was something they never could explain. In the dirt around the tent were deep impressions, like footprints, but they didn't belong to boots or any known animal. They were long, with 3 indentations and a curved shape like dislocated in human fingers. Dozens of them, enough to form a perfect circle around the camp, as if something had encircled them the entire night. But the worst part wasn't the ground out on the main tent. The fabric had 3 parallel vertical marks pressed into it. Deep, perfectly straight. They hadn't torn the material, but they were embedded in it, as if something had pushed in from the outside with inhuman force. When touched, the fabric was freezing cold, as though it still carried the memory of whatever had been there just hours before. The young campers packed their gear as fast as they could, without speaking, without looking at each other, without trying to understand. No one ever returned to that place, and the forest rangers who later heard their story didn't react with surprise. They already knew. It wasn't the first time someone had spent the night there and learned at sunrise that they hadn't been alone, because some tents never moved, yet were always circled in the dark by whatever watched from the fog. Lucas, Mark, and Ethan arrived at the forest after several hours driving along a road that became narrower and darker the deeper it went, surrounded by dense trees that barely allowed sunlight to pass. The 3 had decided to escape their routine and work stress, convinced that a weekend camping trip was exactly what they needed to recharge. They had no idea that this decision would scar them forever. The area they chose wasn't a tourist spot, but an isolated stretch of land where few dared to stay. Locals had strange stories about the place, though none of them reached the group in time. They unloaded their gear, set up the tents, and prepared the campsite for their first night. Temperatures dropped quickly, so Ethan decided to light a fire for dinner. The fire caught immediately, burning with surprising strength and illuminating the camp with a deep red glow more intense than usual. They found it odd, but assumed it was just the quality of the wood and didn't think much of it. The first night passed peacefully. They talked, laughed, and enjoyed the quiet of the forest. When they finally went to sleep, Lucas noticed something strange. The bonfire was still burning, as if it had just been lit. The flames were just as high as an hour earlier, showing no signs of burning down. Mark, half asleep, joked about infinite wood, and they all went to sleep believing it didn't matter. The next morning, the fire was still burning, even though none of them remembered adding more wood. Ethan decided to put it out with water. He made sure there wasn't a single spark left, stirred the ashes, and planned to relight it later. The fire died completely, and the group left to explore the area, enjoying the clean air and silence of the woods. The second day went smoothly, but when they returned to camp, they found something disturbing. The fire had started again on its own. The flames burned with the same strength as the night before, as if someone or something had relit it while they were gone. The three stared in silence, unsure what to say. Ethan tried to joke about it, but even he couldn't hide his unease. That night, the forest felt darker than usual. The fire still burned with an unnatural glow, as if some invisible presence were constantly feeding it. As they tried to fall asleep, they heard footsteps circling the camp. They were slow steps, crushing dried leaves, moving around again and again. Lucas sat up to listen more carefully, but didn't dare peek outside. Ethan and Mark were awake too, though none of them wanted to admit it out loud. At sunrise, they found no visible tracks. But what unsettled them most was that the fire was still burning exactly as it had the night before. Ethan, frightened but stubborn, decided he would put it out himself once again. He used extra water, stirred the ashes, then buried them under dirt and even covered the area with stones. He was determined to prove there was nothing supernatural happening. Then they left to explore another part of the forest. When they returned in the afternoon, the group froze. Not only was the fire burning again, but around the pit were deep footprints, as if someone had been walking in circles around the flames for hours. They were human footprints, large, pressed into the moist ground with such force that it seemed impossible someone could have made them without being heard. The third night was the worst. The footsteps returned, but this time with something else. As they tried to sleep, they heard a sound coming from the fire itself. Low murmurs, like overlapping voices, speaking in an unrecognizable language. Lucas began trembling. Mark tried not to cry, and Ethan realized this was far beyond any logical explanation. Unable to take it anymore, Ethan left the tent with a flashlight shaking in his hand. When he lit up the campsite, he saw something that paralyzed him. The flames were twice as tall as before, and within them, a figure seemed to be forming. The silhouette looked human, writhing, as if trapped inside the fire, struggling to escape. Ethan staggered backward and sprinted back into the tent. Then they all heard a new sound, a deep, heavy breathing right behind their tents, as if something enormous were leaning over them, watching, waiting. No one dare move. They spent the rest of the night curled up, trying not to make a single sound while the murmurs and footsteps continued endlessly. Before dawn, the sounds faded. As soon as daylight arrived, they packed only what they needed, leaving the rest behind. The fire still burned just as intensely, almost as if celebrating their departure. They left without looking back, shaking on the inside, knowing something had been watching them all along. When they returned home, they began to research. They found old reports of campers who disappeared in the same area, bonfires that burned for days without being extinguished, and stories of souls trapped in the forest, unable to cross over. No one believed them, but the three know what they lived was real. The fire didn't burn on wood, it burned on something much darker, and they were lucky to leave before it consumed them as well. Emily, Jason, and Daniel stepped out of the SUV with excitement written across their faces, carrying heavy backpacks and recording equipment. They were university students passionate about nocturnal wildlife, hoping to capture natural sounds and behavior in a remote mountain reserve. Their professors had warned that the area wasn't visited by tourists, but that only made it more appealing. Untouched land, no human noise, perfect for their research. They had no idea that the silence there hid something much older and far more disturbing. They set up camp near a clear mountain stream, in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines that blocked most of the sky. Everything seemed peaceful. The water flowed softly, branches creaked in the wind, and small animals rustled through the underbrush. Jason placed audio recorders and cameras at several points, while Emily documented each step in her notebook. Daniel, with a flashlight hanging from his chest, explored the area to make sure they had chosen a good spot to spend the night. Dinner under the open sky was calm. The sound of the stream and the smell of wet soil accompanied their first hours, surrounded by serene atmosphere. But as soon as darkness covered the forest completely, things began to change. The silence no longer felt natural. It grew thick, heavy, as if every sound was being stored in the air instead of fading away. They were about to go to sleep when the recorders began picking up something none of them expected: whispers. At first, they assumed it was wind moving through the branches, but after checking the audio, they realized it wasn't anything natural. The voices sounded human, as if several people were speaking from different directions at once. The phrases were broken, some understandable, others completely distorted. They said names, ancient words, sounds none of them could decipher. No one slept well that night. Daniel clearly heard someone stop behind his tent, listening. Jason woke up several times with the sensation of being watched from outside. Emily felt a constant chill, like something pressing against the tent fabric. When dawn came, they were exhausted, pale, and deeply unsettled. Outside their tents, they found something disturbing. Their backpacks were open, but nothing was missing. Next to each entrance lay a smear of dark soil, as if mud had been dragged from deep inside the forest. The marks looked like finger strokes, long lines ending right in front of the tents, as though something or someone had gone inside during the night. They tried to continue with the project. Jason checked the patchy signal on his phone and found old records. Decades before, several hikers had disappeared in that same reserve. No bodies were ever found, but nearby residents insisted the souls of the lost wandered between the trees, unable to rest. The second night was even worse. When Emily went to the stream to collect water, she clearly heard someone call her name from the river. It was a woman's voice, broken, heavy with unimaginable pain. Emily froze. She knew her friends were far away and no one else lived in the reserve. The surface of the water trembled unnaturally, as if someone beneath it was trying to rise. She didn't scream. She backed away in tears and ran back to camp as fast as she could. Jason and Daniel barely had time to ask what happened when the forest began to make sounds that were anything but natural. Muffled laughter, layered whispers, sobs, choked screams. Each sound came from a different direction, as if the entire forest was full of trapped voices. They tried to ignore it, but the recorders confirmed what they were hearing. Every microphone captured more and more wailing, as if their equipment had attracted the attention of whatever lived there. In the middle of the night, they heard something new. Footsteps. Not animal footsteps, human ones. Slow, heavy, walking through the leaves without trying to hide. Then they stopped completely, right beside the tents. None of them moved. Emily covered her mouth to keep from screaming. Jason held his breath. Daniel shut his eyes, trying to block it out. Then a voice spoke from just outside. A whisper, not addressed to them, reciting something in another language, like a chant or incomplete prayer. They stayed awake until dawn. When the sun rose, the forest returned to normal as if nothing had happened. For them, that was the final sign. They had to leave before something irreversible occurred. As they packed up, the recorders kept running. The voices grew louder, as if something knew they were escaping. Even as they walked toward the SUV, they could hear whispering among the trees. Back home, they reviewed the recordings. What they found wasn't imagination. The video showed human silhouettes standing among the trees, motionless, dark figures just meters away, watching while they slept. The audio was filled with wailing, as if every lost soul had tried to speak through their equipment. Emily decided to delete everything. She didn't want to publish it, didn't want to share it, didn't want those voices following them any further. Jason and Daniel agreed, but deleting the files didn't erase the experience. Each of them admitted privately that sometimes, at night, when they closed their eyes, they could still hear these same voices drifting through the air, as if something had chosen to follow them home. They never imagined this trip to the mountains would be any different from the others. The group was made up of 4 friends: Mark, Lily, Adrian, and Cindy, veteran campers with years of experience. They had equipment, backpacking skills, survival knowledge, and a tradition. Every summer, they picked a new remote location to spend 3 nights away from the city. This year, they chose a lesser-known national forest, a damp, towering woodland cut by an icy river and surrounded by giant redwoods that seemed to touch the sky. The first day passed normally. They set up camp near the river, lit a fire, and enjoyed the mix of rushing water and night insects. What none of them knew was that the area had a dark history of disappearances, stories never shared with tourists but well known among older locals. It wasn't blamed on wildlife or accidents. People said that something roamed the woods, something that hated seeing tents glowing beneath its sky. The first sign came before dawn. Mark, a light sleeper, woke to what he first assumed were slow footsteps on the damp forest floor. At first he thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon, but then realized the footsteps weren't light at all. They were heavy, dragging, as though whatever was walking wasn't bending its knees. When silence returned, he convinced himself he had imagined it, unaware that the others had heard something similar at different points in the night. In the morning, as they stepped out of the tent, they found a huge footprint in the wet soil, like an oversized human print pressed deep into the ground, too defined to be from melting snow or another hiker. None of them commented on it. Ignoring it felt safer than acknowledging it. But one thing was clear: they weren't alone. The second day, they explored the area. Hiking upstream, they found a rotting wooden footbridge and the remains of an old campsite, torn tarp, a shredded backpack, clothing faded by time. There were no signs of animals or violence, as if the owners had abandoned it all at once, fleeing without even gathering their gear. Lily shivered but kept it to herself. That evening, returning to their own camp, they noticed something wrong. Their tents weren't damaged, but they had been moved. Cindy swore hers had shifted several inches to the right. Adrian, the skeptic, insisted the ground was uneven or they were misremembering. But when night began settling in, the forest atmosphere changed. No birds, no insects. Even the river sounded muted. Everything was too still. They tried going to sleep early, but no one managed to drift off. Inside Mark and Adrian's tent, the silence felt thick. Then footsteps again, not moving off in the woods, but circling the tent, slow and dragging. Mark froze when the steps stopped right outside their tent. It sounded like something leaned forward, peering through the fabric. Then came something worse, a hand running slowly across the outside of the tent, as if checking whether someone was inside. Adrian wanted to rush out with a flashlight, but Mark held him back. Whatever was outside, facing in the dark could be far worse. After long, tense minutes, the footsteps finally drifted away. At dawn, they inspected the soil, but unlike the day before, there were no tracks. In fact, the earth looked wiped clean, as if someone had brushed away every trace. The third night broke them. The group fell into a restless sleep, but woke suddenly to a sound none of them would ever forget. The zipper of one of the tents slowly opening from the outside, as though someone unrushed was entering. Lily, sleeping alone, opened her eyes and felt something moving inside, dragging what felt like long fingers across the inner lining of the tent. She didn't scream. Terror closed her throat. She lay still, listening to it breathe inside with her, but never touching her. When the zipper moved again and she heard the exit open and close, she knew it had left, though not necessarily gone to T-dawn. Lily trembled in sweat. She told them what happened. They all agreed there would be no fourth night. As they packed up, the feeling of being watched never left. And they were right. A nearby tree trunk shuddered, as if something massive had been standing behind it. All four turned at once, but nothing was visible. Still, the forest remained dead silent, as if every living thing waited for them to leave. The hike back was fast and tense. They didn't stop to rest or admire the scenery. Once they crossed the forest boundary, the world returned. Birds, wind, rushing water, as if nothing had happened. But none of them felt relief. That night, they stayed in a nearby cabin, too shaken to drive home. The next morning, before leaving, Mark reviewed the pictures he had taken. Among the camp photos, he found one nobody remembered taking. A shot of the tents at night, and behind them, faintly lit by moonlight, the silhouette of something impossibly tall and thin staring toward the camera, with arms too long and a head tilted to one side, as if caught in the act of watching. Mark never went camping again. None of them did. And the tent, the one that seemed to move on its own, was never truly alone.